everybody thinks digital transformation is like ripping your backbone out and transplanting a new one in, and you're crippled for the duration. But it is not.
I wonder how internally some of these digital transformations are actually pulled together. Is it sort of like on the side of a desk? Is it something we do kind of part-time? This is a fundamental shift. It may impact directly on the business model. It may force us to do things in a very different way, but we assume that people who may not have a retail tech interest, they're suddenly put in charge of this thing.
Coming into an organization, do you go in through IT? Do you go in through marketing? Do you go in through merchandising? There's so much confusion, and it's different from company to company. There's no clear path on who to talk to, how to get in with a company, how to connect, and where to start that transformation.
It's too easy to get lost in those proof of concepts. And what I find is in almost every case, the proof of concept never fails. And it never fails because each executive team that decides to go down that path, right, you put your best team on it. You pick, if it's a store-based experiment, you pick your best test store.
Thank you for joining me today. My name is Gary Newbury. I'm an award-winning strategic advisor and delivery executive. I'm focused on the rapid transformation of disrupted supply chain performance across the make, move, sell flow of consumer products and services from production to porch and assembly floor to shelf. My purpose is to inspire business leaders, particularly those within the consumer products and retailing space, to think big, be bold, scale, adapt, and win, one epic supply chain transformation at a time. There's additional content available from my website, RetailAID.ca, or on my YouTube channel, RetailAID. Be sure to check these out. As the business world faces significant volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, business leaders looking to drive market-leading performance need to be tapping into thought leaders, strategic advisors, and implementation executives who have mastery of operational turnarounds and strategic transformations, together with a strong track record of transitioning enterprises to become more agile, innovative, and digital. There's great material to get through here, so let's get started. Welcome everybody to the RetailAID podcast, the retailing conversations for the 2020s. I've got some brilliant guests today. I've got DeAnn, Campbell and Ricardo Belmar, and we're going to be talking about digital transformation. But before we start, could I just ask DeAnn just to give us a quick introduction to herself, a slight background, and then hand it over to Ricardo.
Yes, I'm DeAnn Campbell, and I work with a consulting group called AAG Consulting. We're a consortium of consultants that help technology companies and retailers marry up tech performance with customer experience and try to elevate their profit margins and get their performance-based metrics.
And you're writing a book.
I am in the process of trying to put my thoughts together about how important it is for retailers to converge their channels, not just omnichannel. I think omnichannel is something that has worked for the past 10 years, but it isn't effective at this point. Now we need something beyond that. And it is more of a convergence of all channels so that people can flex more quickly between online and offline and social media. And as new innovations come online, we no longer have the luxury of time to build a team to activate around that new innovation. We have to have a team that's in the process of evolving in sync with that new innovation.
Thanks, DeAnn. Ricardo?
Hey everyone, I'm Ricardo Belmar. I'm currently lead partner marketing for retail and consumer goods at Microsoft in the US. And I've spent probably the better part of the last 2 decades working in the retail tech space in one form or another, whether it's delivering technology to retailers or delivering services around those technologies. So I've spent quite a bit of time supporting retailers in trying to deliver those digital technologies and things that I think we're going to be talking about here, and really trying to understand how to help retailers get past all the challenges and problems that come up with those things. Other things that you may see me around, I also host a podcast called the Retail Razor Show, where you guessed it, we talk about things like retail tech and how that impacts retailers.
Excellent. Thanks very much. I'm going to remind ourselves, for those people who follow the podcast, of a conversation I had with George Menikakis, Jeff Roberts, and Ollie Banks a couple of months ago, where I asked Ollie to explain what a digital transformation was, and he gave it such a great description, I couldn't fail to plonk it into this conversation.
The term digital transformation is a huge bit of BS, frankly. And the reason is the word digital. We live in a digital world now. Everything has been digitalized. And I can't remember the last time I heard someone talking about a great big change where there was no form of system interaction, no form of data or anything like that. It's like, we're going to introduce a paper process and all this. Just doesn't happen anymore, right? Everything is digital. And I think given that, the term digital transformation is a bit of a misdirection, because when we say digital transformation, everyone's head goes to IT. And actually, when we're talking about transformation, it's so much broader than just one division within the company. And don't get me wrong, IT is important, but it's not everything. And when you are going through a transformation, and we'll get into that word in just a moment, it involves lots of different aspects. People often gets forgotten about in digital transformation, right? Because our focus is on the digital side of it. Process, procedures, policies, business models even, goodness. And I think that's where we need to get to when we're thinking about transformation rather than digital transformation, is actually, what is the scope of this? I cut it into two. Fundamental transformation, which is your, shall we say, classic wipe everything clear and let's start with a blank sheet of paper and say, what does the business model mean? What does the operating model mean? Let's build it up perhaps from scratch. Could be a brand new proposition, lots of different aspects. So a fundamental transformation, and then at the other end, an incremental transformation, which is an evolution, an optimization almost, which may sound insignificant, but when you look at companies like what Amazon do, who are really expert at incremental transformation, continually nudging the business and the operating model forward bit by bit, suddenly it can lead to great wins.
Today, we're going to extend the discussion about digital transformation as to how to avoid the pitfalls. That previous conversation was all about why organizations should digitally transform. This one is about some of the results of recent digital transformations. In late 2022, a survey performed by Harvey Nash and KPMG suggested digital transformation programs almost unanimously underdeliver, with a shocking average of 87.5% of programs not meeting scope, timelines, budget, and/or realizable value. This, one might argue, is a sad indictment on the basis retailers, their partners, and other businesses have been engaged on a digital transformation journey since typically Y2K, the year 2000. How might a retailer approach such large-scale organizational programs to move a needle on outcomes and achieve their strategic goals as they continue to digitally transform during the 2020s? I'm going to hand that over to Ricardo to get the conversation going.
Thanks, Gary. I have to say, those are pretty startling statistics, right? It makes you wonder what's happening, right? Where are things going wrong? And what I think is interesting, and if you think about what Ollie was saying, that I find two things that are often forgotten in this digital transformation process. And that's that it's not just about the technology and the digital part of that transformation. It's also about the people that are involved and the processes that are going to be impacted by that transformation. And as a result of often leaving those two things out, I find that we see retailers sort of confusing experimentation with transformation, in the sense that there's a strong desire to try something out. And that makes sense. Totally understandable, right? You see that there's a new technology that is supposed to transform a process or an operational nature of your business. And so you naturally want to try it out. That's an experiment, right? That's something where, okay, we agree we're going to try it out. There's going to be a team of people that are going to lead that trial. It invariably leads to a proof of concept, which is probably one of my least favorite words in retail, is the proof of concept. Yeah, Gary's shaking your head, and so DeAnn, you too. And I'm sure you know exactly what I'm going to say. It's because it's too easy to get lost in those proof of concepts. And what I find is in almost every case, the proof of concept never fails. And it never fails because each executive team that decides to go down that path, right, you put your best team on it. You pick, if it's a store-based experiment, you pick your best test store, and every retailer has test stores. Why do you have test stores? Because those stores are inclined to work with experiments and understand them. There's pros and cons to doing that, but inevitably it means that it's going to work, and you may get misled into thinking that because it worked there, well, it's automatically going to work everywhere. And so you label the experiment a success, and now you think you're about to move into the transformative phase by just deploying it everywhere. But then you've ignored the difference in people and process at those other locations versus where you did in the proof of concept. So I think that's, for me, that's one major source of contention here, is that it's too easy to fall down this experimentation trap and just decide to call it transformation before you've actually established what the transformation really is.
I love that, Ricardo. Companies misunderstand and incredibly underestimate the level of human resources and collaboration that it takes to really implement true transformation. I see it all the time where they will bring in something like self-checkout technology, thinking we are having troubles hiring staff for our checkouts, and this is going to solve all of our problems. Yet they don't talk to people in other departments. They don't understand the customer journey, and they end up slowing down checkout rather than speeding it up. And there's a grocery retailer that I think is a perfect example of what not to do with digital transformation. I won't mention their name, but they have tried several times to improve the checkout experience through technological transformation. They started with scan and go. That failed because they created too many friction points and they didn't have accurate inventory tracking systems. Then they switched to self-scan checkouts. Again, same problem. Every time somebody has an ID check or a product barcode is broken or something isn't working or you have a coupon, a staff person has to come over and clear the system so you can keep checking out. So it was really no faster than a regular checkout and a lot more inconvenient. And they thought, we'll solve this problem by adding conveyor belts. Well, now, instead of scanning your product and putting it in a bag, you scan it in a product, put it on the conveyor belt. It goes all the way down, far away from the customer. So now you have to scan everything. And when you're done scanning, you run to the end of the conveyor belt and you load everything into bags. And so you've added twice as much time to the scanning process. And it really speaks to how their concept of digital transformation was stopped at the technology and did not extend into how to leverage human capital, what people are really needed to make the system work, and what are the problems customers are actually experiencing that we really need to solve to optimize our experience and get our profit margins realigned with what we're trying to accomplish.
We've touched on this already, this idea of people, process, and technology, and many people just leap to the technology, forgetting about the implication. I mean, they're trying to solve a problem with technology, and they think that that technology is going to solve not just the data problem, but actually everything else that they can't necessarily verbalize. But I think there's also another thing in process, and that is the scoping of these exercises and who we will involve and who we won't involve. And sometimes I don't think it's a conscious process. It's like, okay, if we take something in my area, supply chain, we're going to do a warehouse management system or a transport management system. We'll only talk maybe to the management, and we're only talking about trucks, maybe the yard organization and routing, when we forget that actually this sits in the wider ecosystem of the business organization and customers and other feeds to this. And I think there's some part of the scoping process fails to recognize the stakeholders that should be involved. If we just look at project management, the way that we should be doing it, we start, guess what? We start with some initiation phase, which actually forces us to look at who are the stakeholders here. And that's a step which is really messy, can be very confusing, maybe somewhat politically charged as well, because why should we involve those? We must do the stakeholder analysis first, and also to work out, are they going to be for or against it? and then monitor their behavior as more of the information about the scope of the thing we're going to digitally transform evolve.
There is something to what you just said there, Gary, about where's the scope end and where does it start? And I agree, there is a tendency to jump to, oh, look, here's the technology. This is something we could use. It will help us transform something that's not digital today into something using that technology that we all know and expect it's going to make everything much faster, everything better for everyone involved. But then again, my favorite examples are always something like Dan's example of a technology in the store. Who stops and asks the store team if that's going to be an advantage or not? Who stops to ask the people in the stores who are there every day, working with customers every day, is this going to remove friction? Is this going to speed up a process? Is it going to enable something that you can't do today to be done tomorrow because we've added this technology? Or when you ask that store team, are they going to tell you, well, that's just the same, just a different way of doing what we already do. How is that any better? And if that's the response you get, then you should be stopping and say, well, wait a minute, what's the advantage of investing in this technology? Are we using it the right way? Is there another way we should use it that would be better? And then engage with the people who are going to be the ones who are engaging with it on a regular basis to help you understand what should that new process be, which again, brings us right back to what happened to the process on the way. We started out assuming this technology was going to replace a process, but we didn't stop to think, what's the new process going to be as a result of having that technology? And that requires, I think, oftentimes more people than most retail executives think it will require when they start the project.
Also understanding what it really does to your profit margin. Ultimately, isn't that the goal of digital transformation? Yes, it's wonderful to create a better customer experience, but retail is a business. And if you're not making a profit, you're not in business. And so understanding that maybe you do need to hire a few more people, but the end result is you're going to generate more business, and that's going to improve our profit margin, rather than thinking I'm going to reduce staff and that's going to help my bottom line. Top line is every bit as relevant as bottom line in retail. And so understanding the checkout experience and, continuing on with that example, is that's the last memory a shopper has as they leave your store. Whether they come back again is going to depend on that memory. It's going to color that memory. And if the checkout experience was so annoying, then maybe you're going to try a competitor next time you go shopping. And so not understanding that impact and how that ties into your profit margin undermines the effectiveness of any digital transformation you're trying to implement. And so you have to consider the marketing aspect of it, and the new business generation aspect of it, and the customer satisfaction aspect of it, as well as the cost reduction side of it.
What you've just said, DeAnn, just reminds me of my often said pitch, which is, surely we would only consider things like a digital transformation or elements of digital transformation on a roadmap to a clear vision. And that vision may be in 5 years' time, might be in 3 years' time. And we would have on that roadmap things around culture, things around process, things around systems and technology, things around infrastructure, a whole range of things. And therefore, we would only be digitizing parts of our process or our organization on that roadmap. So these things that yourself and Ricardo has talked about are like experimentation. Surely it would only be allowed if the leadership team had a clear vision, if it was working towards a roadmap. And I suspect that many digital transformations are born out of a great idea and a shiny piece of software. And of course, it's surrounded by some ROI idea, often quite unproven, certainly in the context that, we've got in front of us, rather than it's on this path and we better be doing it in the next 2 days, because otherwise we're going to get behind on our roadmap. I wonder if we stand back and think about what are the triggers for digital transformation. Is it the salesperson comes in and with a glossy brochure, or is there something more fundamental that might be encouraging teams inside organizations to say we need to do this because it's on the roadmap? And then it leads me to suggest that if that roadmap is less than clear or less than clearly communicated to people in the business, is that a gap which is filled with areas of experimentation, the proof of concept thing. Oh, look, this works over here, so let's just get on with it. At least we're doing something. It's like, please do something, anything, rather than like we're on a clear path to meeting a certain expectation, which might be a long-term plan to get to somewhere.
Do you think there's a little bit of risk too here that many retailers get, I'd say, trapped in a sense of short-termism, in that we're only want to engage this digital transformation for a short-term gain, and that short-term might be measured in a quarter or 2 quarters. And I think often that's because many retailers, especially if they have a seasonal business, think in terms of when's the next holiday shopping season. So they look at the calendar and say, I'm at the beginning of the year, about to go into spring, so I'm thinking about what could a potential digital transformation be that's either going to reduce a cost or provide a productivity gain of some kind that will increase top line, like DeAnn was talking about before. But suddenly now I have this new goal that, well, I really want to have that in place by September because I don't want it to impact the next holiday season. I want to have it done by then. So now I'm already imposing a deadline that may or may not make sense for that particular digital transformation. And to your point, Gary, if there isn't a long-term vision that says, in 3 years, let's say, right, we need to be here in some productive goal, and how is any digital transformation we engage in going to get us there, then you can't be locked into these seasonal components of timelines that force you down a path because that's really where the experimentation should come in, right? If I have that long-term vision, to your point, I should be able to list out in the plan, maybe there are 3 experiments using technology we need to conduct, and we'll get those done this year before the holiday shopping season so we don't impact anything negatively. Then that allows us to understand which one of those 3 is the right one we need for next year's goal. And then we're always kind of iterating this process year over year so that we're always moving forward, but we're not trying to do these short-term things that so often I see get driven by someone saying, well, we have to cut costs. And my response is usually to that as well. You can't really cost cut your way to success. You need to really think about what are you investing in over a longer term that's going to result in cost reduction that will help that bottom line, while at the same time, hopefully giving you a productive benefit on the top line so that you're increasing that margin. If you just keep focusing on that short term and allowing the experiments to dictate everything, then you're always going to find, okay, one of the 3 experiments works, the other 2 failed. And sure, we're all probably also going to talk about failing fast, right, as part of this process, and that's fine as long as you're learning something from it, and that learning is being applied to something else. It's not just the end of the road, right, from that learning and just say, oh, I guess that doesn't work, so we're not going to try it again. It should be telling you something else to try then as part of the overall transformation, so that you're not getting lost in the process.
I love that. Short-term thinking really is a problem. And another challenge on a par with that is disconnects between departments, which really causes havoc when technology is trying to reach an organization. If you have something like metaverse rooms for retailers, that's something people are getting into. But who does the vendor approach? Do they go in through IT? Do they go in through marketing? It really touches both departments, and both departments want to have a say in it. Both may want to kind of hoard some of the decision making so it fulfills more of their needs than the other department. Same thing with retail media networks, coming into an organization. Do you go in through IT? Do you go in through marketing? Do you go in through merchandising? There's so much confusion, and it's different from company to company. There's no clear path on who to talk to, how to get in with a company, how to connect, and where to start that transformation. And it's easy to think it's digital transformation, we start with IT, but that's not what's always happening. Sometimes it's starting with the marketing department. And so companies need to get a lot more organized on who is responsible for what, who are the decision makers, who's going to own responsibility for management, who's going to own any revenue that may be generated out of it. How are they going to work together, and how are they going to gather and share data for actionable insights? And that's really one of the biggest areas where companies are failing on their report card.
It prompted me to think this, that we just assume that when we're going to do a digital transformation, we've got the IT resources, there might be a budget constraint, there might be a headcount constraint, and all those kind of things. But as a leader of a digital transformation, maybe within a section or a department or even the wider business, we are just assuming, aren't we? And that's not for us, that's just the wider picture, is they have the skills, the knowledge, the interest, the aptitude to actually know what to do. I wonder how internally some of these digital transformations are actually pulled together. Is it sort of like on the side of a desk? Is it something we do kind of part-time? This is a fundamental shift. It may impact directly on the business model. It may force us to do things in a very different way as we interact with our customers. But we assume that people who may not have a retail tech interest, they're suddenly put in charge of this thing. They may be an operator, they may have a supply chain background only, although there's normally quite a lot of tech there, or stores, or wherever, whichever area it is, that we assume that they're going to step up, they're going to fill in the gaps of their knowledge, we're going to throw a technology person to sit with them, and it's all going to be great. Surely, we've got the budget, let's get on with it. I think really there's a fundamental assumption that the people who are going to lead and own these digital transformations actually have enough scope of vision, understand how it does maybe fit onto the roadmap, and actually have the skills to manage a different area of endeavor than what they're used to in steady state. So if I'm a store manager and somebody said, you're going to lead this digital transformation in your store, I have no idea what that really means. I mean, have we ever asked that question? Do you feel comfortable with this idea that we're going to give you this responsibility to get on with whatever it is, however we describe it? We sort of launch into these things without perhaps asking that fundamental question. Have we got the skills to actually see this all the way through to the end?
Gary, I think you just described why there's such a tremendous industry out there with system integrators and services companies to help retailers. I mean, at the end of the day, I think you're spot on, right? There is a lack of skill, and not through anyone's fault, right? It's because these are all new things. We're being asked to do new things, and new things require learning, and it requires new skill sets. And it's okay for an organization to say, we don't have that skill set in-house. We need to find someone to partner with who can help us and give us the right guidance. And let's face it, that's why there is such a massive services industry out there delivering that kind of knowledge. And in theory, a retailer that goes to one of these integrators is expecting that by doing so, they're going to work with someone that's going to be their partner who's done this already, right? Ideally with other retailers, and based on what they learned in those implementations, they're going to get the benefit of that, which they would not have had in-house by working with these groups. What you raise here really is another point that maybe we should be layering on to this transformation discussion, and let's put it in the people category. It's that you need the right external partner to do this. And sometimes that's just a technology partner. Maybe you do have the right skill because you have really strong operational practitioners. Maybe if it's supply chain related, you have a really strong supply chain management team already, but you lack certain components. And so what you need is the right technology partner. But other times it may be more than just the technology. If you recognize that technology should lead to a new process that's going to help the people that are involved in this transformation and its outcome, you may need another partner to help you redefine that process, who has experience that your organization may not have. And this really isn't saying we need to hire someone, right? It's not really a matter of going to HR and saying there's one individual we're missing on the team, please go recruit that person. That's not really what I think this says. This is more, I'm looking for the right external organization that has relevant experience and skill set that we can build on, that will help us build that capability internally. So finding the right partners to do this with, I think, is another critical component.
You're so right, Ricardo. I think in future, a company is only going to be as good as its partner ecosystem. And it's really interesting that if you look at a startup, for example, they have that mentality of, well, I don't know how to do that, but I'm going to stay up all night, watch YouTube videos and learn how to do it. Now figure it out because we need this. And then as soon as a company starts to establish, they get some funding, they start to get big, they lose that flexible mindset of, I don't know how to do it, but I know I can figure it out. And so the role of partners is critical for the success of retailers now, because you're maintaining that ability, like a startup, to be flexible and to bring in new services on an a la carte basis. And yet at the same time, larger organizations don't develop the team or the resources who are good at finding, at cultivating and onboarding new partnerships. So HR is great at hiring staff, but who is that resource that is good at hiring partners, at screening consultants, at bringing in the right people? And it's so much based on relationship, which is a terrible way to bring in and find the right people. I like this person, I don't like that person. This guy is related to my nephew, so let's hire him. You can't do that. You have to have a framework and a process for finding the right people to solve your problems short term and also help you identify those problems long term.
There's a whole bunch of people who do systems integration work, but how do we select the right system integration? Have we got a framework for that, which requires a certain, I would say, purchasing skill, a sort of objective purchasing skill, to actually gather the requirements inside the organization, so we can actually set up some criteria to be able to really understand when we're seeing the right type of people who can not only deliver the service, but can work with us. We're talking about an area of activity which requires a very clear understanding of not only the current culture, but the culture that we're going to try and migrate towards in conjunction with the technology we want to implement, and an organization or an individual who can help us on that journey to that new cultural path, but also can work with what we've got and will encourage and send the right messages to people inside the organization to encourage them to embrace the technology when it's finally delivered. It's a really important point. And I think it's a very subtle point that you raise there, DeAnn, but it's one that I'm sure that just gets blasted out. Right, okay, I know somebody in the overall scheme of things. Are they going to be the right person? Just because you know them and you can trust them and all these kind of things, and may have done something in some other company that you may know of, and so they're quite high in your own consideration set. But sometimes going out to the market to really understand and test your own resolve in how determined are you to get this right. And it starts with perhaps that scaling of requirements to say, if we're going to go down that path of systems integration, how do we know we're going to select somebody who can help us select the right systems integration partner?
There's definitely a little bit of an art to it, right? It's not just a science in that sense. And I do think you're hitting on a pretty good point, that there's the desire maybe to have some of these decisions come down to the one retail executive that is supposed to make the decision. But I think at the end of the day, the best decisions of this type get made by the right team of people around that executive that are evaluating a lot of different criteria, so that it doesn't end up being a random choice. It's not just a convenient choice. You have to know what that criteria is. A lot of the things I think that we're bringing up here, people watching may get the idea that says, oh, well, then the only way I can make this work is if I take a really long time to do it. And I have no hope now of getting this done quickly. And maybe I'll speak to that point a little bit, because I don't think we're saying that the reason these things fail is because you'd always do them too quickly. Sometimes the project might be short, right? It really depends on what it is you're trying to resolve. I think maybe that's another area that we hadn't covered yet, that where digital transformation gets lost, is that there may be a tendency in a lot of organizations, when you hear the phrase digital transformation, suddenly there's this expectation that this is some huge, massive undertaking that is intended to completely change our business. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, right? It might not be. Maybe the digital transformation just has to do with one process that your store teams are doing that requires every store employee to take 3 hours to finish something, when you really wish it only took 5 minutes. And that's all you're trying to solve. And if that's all you're trying to solve, maybe it's not a 3-year project. Maybe it is a 3-month project. I think if there's anything most retailers learned during the pandemic, is that not every technology project has to take, 6 to 9 months of planning plus 1 to 2 years of deployment. You actually can do things sometimes in 6 weeks or 10 weeks or 3 months or whatever it is. It's a matter of, is that really a digital transformation, or is that just a project? Are you doing something to innovate? Because that's another thing I'll bring up here, is that there may be some confusion, like I said at the beginning, where is it transformation or experimentation? maybe another word to throw out there is it innovation? Innovation doesn't have to be digital transformation, and digital transformation doesn't have to be innovation. Those could be two completely different things depending on what the goal and the objective is for the particular task or project. And sometimes those innovations are as simple as, my favorite examples we saw during the pandemic and during lockdowns, right, is when retailers suddenly from one week to the next implemented curbside pickup by just planting a pole out in the parking spot in front of their storefront. And suddenly now they had curbside pickup. Didn't take 6 months of planning, didn't take 6 weeks of deployment. They just went ahead and did it. Was that a digital transformation? Because, now it's suddenly required a new digital process. It's debatable, right? I don't know that I would call that a digital transformation. Was it an innovation? I think so, because it delivered a capability they didn't have before. But it's easy to mix these things up and then get lost in the routine of deciding, well, does that mean it should be short? It should be long project? Is it somewhere in between? And that's where, again, a lot of these things, because they get lost in that mess, right? That is sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that you just end up failing when there was no reason it should have failed.
Ricardo, that's one of the best points I've heard in a long time. Because it's true, everybody thinks digital transformation is like ripping your backbone out and transplanting a new one in, and you're crippled for the duration. But it is not. And that's one of the things I saw. I recently went to EuroShop, and I was really excited. Usually when you go to shows like CES or NRF, you see these big, new, sexy innovations that are just going to change the face of retail. EuroShop this year was not like that. It was the small tech, as I call it, the filler tech. And I think that's underestimated in the importance of digital transformation. It's all well and good to think, I'm going to put robots in my warehouse and I'm going to put self-checkouts. I'm going to install this great scan and go system. But it's really the inventory, the smaller tools to track your inventory that you have to have in place. So what are the small steps that you can take now that are affordable, that are executable? Think about QR codes 10 years ago, they didn't take because the content engine wasn't in place. And so they were kind of dumb because they didn't really do anything of value, and it took a lot of effort. Now AI can generate content on a dime for next to nothing. So QR codes are showing up everywhere. That's digital transformation, by having those smaller structures in place. Digital signage. 10 years ago, stores were kind of playing around with it. It never really took. It didn't gain traction. Now with Stores Medium, because of the content engine and the other small technologies in place, inventory tracking, things like that, now Stores Medium is possible. And that's a major digital transformation as well. And so that's what really, I think your point just underscores the importance of looking for those small technology pieces that you can put in place now that will be part of that overall vision that you talked about earlier of where they want to be in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years.
This longevity of a project, and sometimes, or a digital transformation, that sometimes just a longevity can be a failure in itself, that it loses pace inside the organization. But sometimes that loss is somebody critical to that delivery leaves the organization. And we will have seen quite a lot of transition in organizations in the senior management team over the last 2 or 3 years. What do you do when you've got this burning project that's maybe part of the vision, the strategic roadmap, that you need to have this delivered at this time, and the person who's leading that and owning that actually does a sidestep to your competitor or somewhere outside the industry? How do you protect yourself from that? Firstly, it's, can you crunch the timescale up so that it's delivered sensibly, robustly, and that takes some of the liability around individuals, but also succession planning. I think most organizations do have a general problem with succession planning, but it becomes even more prominent when you've got a series of very strategic projects owned by a very few number of individuals. The organization develops then that dependency to those individuals attached to those projects. So I think as a sidestep to allocating responsibility, moving the projects forward, the initiatives forward, there has to be a succession plan alongside that so that the organization remains resilient and we stay focused on on the vision, on the strategic roadmap?
There's some interesting points there, because if you think about an organization that may pride itself on being a lean organization, then with that comes the risk of, well, what happens when that key individual that has that knowledge moves on? What happens to the knowledge? Does the organization lose the knowledge? Does the business lose it? Or is it something that could have been documented somewhere, or that others could pick up behind that person? Or do you balance this out by having a slightly larger team so that you have some of that redundancy in the knowledge, but then you run the risk of, well, are there too many people now involved, and that has a cost implication and lots of other factors. So I don't know that there's a right answer for that. It really, I think, depends on the individual organization. The company's culture has a lot to do, I think, with the ability to mitigate that kind of risk of the knowledge leaving, kind of in that example. But at the same time, I think that it does kind of reinforce the need that says in any kind of transformation project like this, you're not just, as an organization, flying by the seat of your pants, right? You actually are documenting things. There is a project plan. There's guidance involved with it. There are milestones. There are checks, so that if someone does leave, that you have a fair chance of being able to continue without that loss. I mean, you shouldn't have the expectation that if one person leaves, or if it's the person who had the idea that got you started, if they move on, that suddenly this project is lost or the transformation is lost. You should have mitigation in place, right? That even if it's as basic as just, we have the plan documented, we know what the milestones are, we know what's happening. And if we go back to what we were saying before about having the right partners, right? Part of the reason you bring in those partners is to help keep you on track. You're relying on them to lead that sort of guidance. And if you've defined that overall engagement with them properly, with that partner, right, they're leaving you with the appropriate level of documentation and ability to continue working on this. Most of these projects, I think this is maybe another piece that we haven't touched on yet. Most of these, when you hit that final expected milestone and you want to declare the transformation is complete, more than likely, it's actually not complete. What you've really done is you've gotten to the point where you're getting the benefit from this transformation, but it has probably, through the process, led you to realize that there are maybe 2, 3, or 4 additional things that should be done as the next step beyond that. And maybe you're going to continue working with that same partner to help you do that. Maybe it's a new engagement or a new project, but it really is, you can call it another iteration. Maybe sometimes organizations are afraid to call it an iteration because iteration implies that you're never finished. There's a little bit of a desire here to admit that it doesn't have to be 100%, right? When you can get to 95% or 90% and be seeing real benefit from that transformation, if you've done it in the best way possible. And that last 10%, maybe you do need to iterate 3 or 4 more times to get that last 5 to 10%. Maybe it does require a new project because it's almost never completely finished in that sense. I think that also helps say that if one or more of the key individuals that started you on this path, if they're now no longer available or they moved on to another project, they've left the business, the engagement can continue, the transformation can continue because it's already moving. You've got the right level of momentum and you're following the path that you set out for yourself to do that, and you can move on. Sometimes there are things that you can't foresee. Technology changes too. If we could think about this as a long-term project, the technology state that it was in when you started the project, if we look at how quickly things are changing, just look at all the developments in AI in the last 6 months alone. Right. If you started a project 6 months ago, you might be looking at yourself now saying, oh, well, wait a minute, we should change the scope already because it's now an order of magnitude better or more. We should change direction slightly. And you have to have that flexibility and agility as well. So there are all these factors. And I think it comes back to what we said at the beginning, that the people in the process as part of the transformation are probably the most important piece. It's not just about the technology, because the technology will change and you need to adapt with it along the way.
That is a great concept. And maybe we should change the name. Instead of digital transformation, it is, digital evolution, because it's never done. You're never going to be finished evolving, because the customer journey is always going to change, and innovation and new technologies are always going to be coming along. You are just always going to be in a state of evolution. I think it's interesting too, talking about succession planning, because succession planning isn't just about who's going to replace individuals, but it's also what's going to happen to your internal processes. And it's not the same for every company. Every company has to have their own idea of what they need, and it's going to change from time to time. If you look at Amazon, and Ricardo, I know you know Amazon far better than pretty much anyone on the planet. Andy Jassy knew the system very well. He comes from AWS. He was an Amazonian for a very long time. And so he took over the reins to continue on what Jeff Bezos was doing. And it's actually starting to cause some problems. And then if you look at some company like Starbucks, Howard Schultz stepped in because when they brought someone in from within the ranks, it didn't go so well. And he stepped back in to try to help. Now they brought in Laxman Narasimhan, I think his name is. He comes from Pepsi. And it's fresh blood coming in. He is going to shake things up. Yet there are some fundamental aspects of the company that Howard and others just need to not change. And one is the third place mentality. That's been gold for them right from the start. And they need to kind of get back to that. How do you create a succession plan that allows someone new to come in from the outside to implement the changes that are needed, and yet in some cases go back to some of the fundamentals that did the company well earlier on? Having that ability to move around within existing processes and layer on new processes is quite a delicate balancing act, and it takes a huge amount of skill. And I think it also takes inside and outside eyes to really make that work properly.
Again, some really interesting points there. One of the things I would think would be like something that sits with this initiative as digital transformation right from the get-go is the process by which benefits are going to be realized, and to have KPIs for the pre-launch, the during launch, the early life support, and then what it should look like in real life. And I think that we often start with a business case, get some flurried activity around, say, project or program management. We bring these resources in, we sit down, we work through a plan, we get everything ready, we have a kickoff, and off we go. We go through early life support, and hopefully we over-manage that stage to land it, and it's over to operational management. But I think one of the interesting points that I don't see very often is that whole thought about not only will it deliver, that's a time constraint, and is it on budget? Yes, no, but it's actually the realizable benefits. And as they accrue during those stages and the KPIs that go around those, to make sure that the thing's on track, it's where we expect it to be, not just the Gantt charts and the red, amber, green schemes that emerge every week, every month. So on that point, we're going to wrap this up and thank both Ricardo and DeAnn for their really interesting insights into this whole process of digital transformation and how to try and avoid the pitfalls of being one of those very unfortunate statistics. The message I'd have to retailers, if you're on any part of this digital transformation, don't make yourself a statistic. So stick around. There's more great conversations ahead. Thank you all for listening in, watching in, and see you again soon. Thank you for listening today. I hope the information has been valuable for you and your organization. You can connect with me via my website, RetailAID.ca, go to the contact page, or via LinkedIn and connect with me there. Please feel free to follow the experts on this podcast for more insights and to join in the conversation. I look forward to collaborating with you and playing an active part with your supply chain and business's transformation as you are inspired to think big, be bold, scale, adapt, and win.